The short-run aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between the price level in the economy and the level of production as measured by GDP. And remember, if the price level changes, so if we experience inflation or deflation, we represent that as movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve. However, there are a variety of factors in the economy that can cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift to the right or to the left. So let's look at a couple of examples to explain this. So first of all, let's take a look at changing wage rates. So let's assume that wage rates in the economy rise. So in general, laborers are being paid more. We would represent that as a leftward shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve. I like to refer to it as a movement to the left because it's a little confusing. It actually looks like the short-run aggregate supply curve is moving upward. And it is actually moving upward because a leftward shift of short-run aggregate supply shows higher costs of producing. So for businesses throughout the economy, because labor is more expensive, it means it's more costly for them to produce. The higher the cost, the lower the profit, and therefore the less incentive to produce. So a leftward shift, holding the overall price level in the economy constant, a higher wage rate will cause a leftward shift and a decrease in production. So let's take one more example. Let's suppose that the economy becomes more productive. So maybe there's new technology, or maybe we become over time better educated as an economy, or a variety of other factors that just might make us more productive. For example, in a recession, an economy often becomes more productive because firms try to do more with less and achieve that. So if the economy becomes more productive, we represent that as a rightward shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve. In other words, an increase in short-run aggregate supply. So the prevailing price level, a more productive economy will produce more. And think about that for a minute. If the short-run aggregate supply curve measures overall cost in the economy, becoming more productive is just the same thing as saying, hey, it's now cheaper for us to produce goods and services because we can do it faster and with less. So we represent that as a rightward shift. And again, notice that it looks like the short-run aggregate supply curve is actually moving downward. So moving to the right or moving down. And the reason it's moving down is because it represents a lower cost of production. So let's take another example. Let's say that oil prices throughout the economy decrease. Will that be a rightward shift or a leftward shift in short-run aggregate supply? Pause and think about it for a minute and diagram it. If you answered that lower oil prices will shift the aggregate supply curve to the right, you're correct, because lower oil prices mean it's cheaper to produce goods and services. Take one more example. Let's say that the US government levies more taxes on producers, say more environmental taxes. Will that shift short-run aggregate supply curve to the right or to the left? Pause and think about it for a moment. If you answered it would shift it to the left, you're right, because higher taxes represent a higher cost of production. So these costs of producing goods and services, land, labor, and capital, when the prices of those things change, it shifts the short-run aggregate supply curve. Technology and productivity also shift the short-run aggregate supply curve. So that might be a good tool to think about how this model works. But the key thing also to remember that if the overall price level in the economy changes, if we experience inflation or deflation, we represent that as a movement along a single curve.